At 38-41, can the Mariners justifiably spend resources on their current roster? We'll talk about that and more coming up. Colby, hit it.
You are Locked On Mariners, your daily Seattle Mariners podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ahoy, sailors. It is Thursday, June 29th, 2023. This is Trident Gonzalez and Colby Patnode for the Locked On Mariners podcast, brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thank you so much for making us your first listen. Subscribe, like, and turn on alerts if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe and leave a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform if you like what you hear. And if you're part of the crew and rock with us every single day, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to hear from us even more, please consider signing up for our Patreon. You can now get a free 7-day trial to check out the show. The link, as well as our social accounts, is in the description of this episode. Later on in the show, we're going to discuss whether or not the Mariners can justify buying on the trade market right now, specifically with 2023 in mind. But first, you've already heard my piece about what this team has gone through over the last 2 days. You can go listen to last night's episode if you're curious. So to start things off, I'm going to step out of the way and I'm going to let Colby have the floor to share his thoughts. So Colby, go for it.
Yeah. The word frustration doesn't quite cover what this season's been like. It hits a little bit different for Ty and myself because our success on this show is tied, somewhat indirectly to the success of the Seattle Mariners. And it's tough to, motivate yourself to do content every single day when the team is just so frustrating. And, I listened to your show last night and it was okay. But you're wrong about one thing. And this is what makes it so much worse. The Seattle Mariners are not a bad team. They are a really mediocre team that is also soft. And that is so much worse than being bad. Bad, you can fix. Bad is, whatever. Take it on the chin for a year. You come back the next year, you regroup. This is a team that's mediocre. They've been about 500 for now, 80 games or so. So they're not bad. If they were bad, fine, whatever. You could start to make moves and there are things you can do, but you're mediocre, which means we can't have a serious conversation about how do you approach this trade deadline? Are you buyers? Are you sellers? Are you doing both? Are you doing sideways trades? Like, how can we fix this? Because this isn't a team that has a talent issue. It needs more talent, certainly. And it's not a complete team. But this isn't a team that's lacking talent. This is a team that is lacking, according to, the Mariners themselves, they're lacking, concentration. They're lacking conviction. They're lacking commitment. And those are all massive, massive issues that may or may not be able to be solved this year, which kind of puts you in this nebulous little, you don't want to give up on them because they have so much talent and because, they do. And only a fool, only an absolute idiot would tell you that the Mariners have a massive talent problem. Could they be more talented? Yes, of course. Every team in baseball could be, but they're not untalented. They don't have a roster full of mediocre talents. They don't. And that's what makes this so frustrating. It's because the pieces are there. They absolutely are. Julio Rodriguez is a superstar. He's supposed to be. Teoscar Hernandez is an all-star. Ty France is an all-star. Cal Raleigh is an all-star. You look at that pitching staff up and down, all-stars everywhere. This is not an untalented team, and that's what makes this all the more frustrating because it's not just we just bring in a couple new guys and everything will be fine. It's not. It's a team that could, in theory, win 7 of their last 10 before the break. And all of a sudden, the momentum's completely shifted. And we're talking about, oh, look at this. It's also a team that could lose 6 in a row, over the next few. And then you're just completely out of it. And you won't know because you have to take things one day at a time. And it's just tough to be in a position right now because you can't, even if the Mariners went out and swept the Tampa Bay Rays, which, by the way, they have to face McClanahan and they have to face Glass now in the next 2 games. All right. But even if they sweep the Rays, the best team in baseball, Do you trust it? How could you? How
Right.
could you trust it? You can't. Then you have to go into the next series against San Francisco, I think. You go into that series against San Francisco, and let's say you win that series. Oh my, we've won 5 of the last 6. This is incredible. We're on the way back. And then you go into Houston, where you play 4, and you lose all 4 or whatever. You're right back to where you started. And that's just kind of the pattern with this team. It's 1 step forward, 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, over and over and over again. And it's so frustrating because, again, it's not a talent issue. Yes, they need more talent. I'll say it again, but they're not untalented. They're not 500 because their roster is built to be 500. That's not what's happening here. And that's what makes it all the more frustrating. It's especially frustrating when you hear, comments from, Scott and Jerry that like, oh, well, there's been a lack of focus this year. There's been a lack of commitment. There's been a lack. And, you could call it whatever you want, but at the end of the day, the Seattle Mariners baseball team is soft. They are soft. Something goes wrong, they shut down, and they cannot turn it back on. We've seen it over and over and over again. When things are going well, they play really well. The second something goes wrong, the second there's a bad at-bat, they shut it down, and they fold up shop. Yesterday, that team had no interest in playing that baseball game. None. They weren't, forget winning. They did not want to be there. They were not interested in playing baseball on that day. And that is a massive problem. How do you fix it? I don't know. And that's what makes it more frustrating. I don't know what the answer is because we can sit here and say, send guys down, bring guys up. And at this point, that's pretty much all we can say. But is that really going to solve anything? Probably not. It's probably not going to change anything. So short of, shocking the system and trading out somebody right now where you're probably not going to get near what you should for that player by trading them now, that hurts you in the long run. And we're not talking about the Mariners being in a position where they have to tear everything down to the studs again and start over, because they don't have to do that. They don't. But if you're not willing to send out somebody who is, being a distraction, or they're not focused, or whatever it is, right? And the Mariners know who that is. They're never going to tell us.
Yep.
They're never going to tell the media. The media is going to guess, and they're going to speculate, and they're going to hear things from other players, and it'll get leaked at some point that so-and-so was this and this and this. That stuff does get out, but we'll never know for sure who it is. And a lot of us right now are speculating that it's Julio Rodriguez. And by us, I mean like Ryan Divish and Shannon Dreyer. They're talking about how the club is frustrated with Julio, feeling like he's not putting out the effort that they need him to put out. That's a massive problem. Now, if there's anybody who can understand that and turn it around and fix it, it's Julio. I don't think that's a long-term problem, but it is a problem for the rest of this year. That is your franchise player. And he's going to be here for a long time. He's going to outlive, at least in terms of being in Seattle, Jerry and Scott. Like, he is here beyond their tenure. That's a problem. And that's a massive. So the question is that something you just have to man up and tell people and get through to Julio any way you can? Or are there people around him that need to leave this ball club because they're a bad influence on him? We don't know. We're just speculating if we say we do.
Well, I mean, there's so much activity around him, right? It's hard for him not, as a 22-year-old to not be distracted by all the things that are going on. Home run derby, new, shoe deal, cereal, all these endorsements and all this stuff that he's doing. Like, that's a lot. And like, I'm not saying that that it's really a fault of his. It's just like, that's just kind of nature, right? For a 22-year-old who gets a lot of attention.
Yeah. And it's something he's never had to deal with before. It's new, right? Yeah. It's the first time that he's been shoved into the limelight, and, last year or whatever, but it doesn't start. Like, it's always the following months after you kind of break through that your life changes significantly. And that's where Julio's at. And again, I don't want to sit here and say that he's, there's some ridiculous people out. He should break up with his girlfriend. Like, get out of here with that.
Oh, that's insane. That's insane.
That's,
I've blocked a couple of people down in the comments that have suggested that. Like,
guys, stay out of Julio's personal life. Like, you don't get to dictate whether or not he's dating somebody.
Let's stop Russell Wilsoning Julio, right? And
At
that
every
that goes
level.
that goes both ways
Yeah.
by over analyzing his personal life and also acting.
Overprotecting poor play.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know. My thoughts on this whole situation is that it's just really frustrating. It kind of drains the motivation out of you. And it's because we know they are so talented, there is still an inkling in the back of your head that says they can right the ship. They have time, they have talent, they have an aggressive GM, they have a farm system that they can go make trades with. Like, they have time.
Right.
And every time we think that, the Mariners will start to play a little bit better. They'll win a series that surprises some people. And you're like, oh, they've won 3 of their last 4. And then they'll lose 3 series in a row. And they'll just keep you on this hook and they won't let you go because they could turn things around. They absolutely could. But based off of the last 80 games, what are we to believe? That there's just going to be another shoe that drops. This team's going to win 7 of 10. Awesome. And then they're going to go around and they're going to lose 4 series in a row. Like, it's just this constant back and forth. It's extremely frustrating.
Right.
And it's aggravating for us, me personally, that, I have friends who tell me that I have to defend the Seattle Mariners. Like, it's my job to defend the Seattle Mariners. I have, commenters saying, oh, you said this and this in the offseason, like you lied. And it's like, no, it didn't lie. That's not a lie. And somehow I am the one who has to defend the Mariners from everybody in my life, people I know and don't know. Like, it's my job to be the spokesperson for the team. It's just frustrating. It's making it not fun to watch baseball. Because when they win, we don't get those questions. We don't get those, we get good questions and we get people who are interested in talking about baseball. And when they lose, everybody comes out of the woodwork and all of a sudden it's, why are you lying about this team? Why are you, shilling for this team? And we're not. Just put, I know that sometimes I know we got to go in a second, but we know the Mariners have people who listen to this podcast. We know people who work for the Mariners, they listen. Do we know who it is? No, not every time. But if you're an employee of the Mariners and you're listening to this, clip it. Clip what I'm about to say. Put it on the big board. Whatever. When the Mariners are in the playoffs this October, play it on a loop. Put it in your promo videos. I don't care. Your baseball team is soft. They are soft as one ply toilet paper, and until they decide essentially that enough is enough and that playing October baseball, meaningful October baseball, is something that they care about, they will not accomplish it. They're soft. Somebody needs to call them out on it. And I honestly, I don't know how many different team meetings you can have. I don't know how many, how you can snipe at people in the media and expect that to be okay. I don't know how they fix it. I don't know. And it's frustrating to me that people want us to have the answers to that question when we don't know either. We're just as frustrated as you guys, maybe even more so. And it's annoying. It's draining, physically and mentally draining. And I want it to stop. And I can't, because this baseball team is so mentally feeble that the second anything goes wrong, they close up shop and that's a loss. They lack the mental fortitude that they had the last 2 years. And I don't know why. I can't explain it.
Accountability. That's what I was talking about last night. I need to see accountability taken. We saw Cal Raleigh take accountability the other night, but that's really been the only guy, like I haven't really seen that across the board, both with the players, with Scott Servais, with Jerry DePoto. It's just a lot of like, this isn't working. It's a lot of pointing out the obvious whenever these guys talk to the media. It's, this isn't working and we don't know why. And it's like, yeah, none of us know why. Like, we're all perplexed by this. Anyone who knows what's up. Now we gotta, I gotta read an ad real quick, but we can continue this conversation actually. Real quick though, before we do that, this episode of the Locked On Mariners podcast is brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. And with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. So forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. The Mariners, of course, have an off day today. They'll be back after it tomorrow against the Tampa Bay Rays. You can catch all the action, if you dare, on the Mariners Hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. So you talked about it a few minutes ago that even if they were to like sweep the Rays, which we've joked about that, like behind the scenes, that, you know, they'll lose a series to the Nationals, then they'll sweep the Rays, right? That's the Mariners thing that would happen. But even if they do that, again, why should I trust it? Because this team has proven time and time again that, yeah, it can win 2 or 3 in a row, but after it does that, it's going to lose 4 in a row. There's no like win 2, lose 1, win 2, lose 1, win 3, lose 2. There's none of that.
Yeah. The Mariners' longest win streak this year is 4.
Yeah.
Their longest losing streak is 4. And there's just a lot of, they lose 3 out of 4, and then like they'll win 2 out of 3, but then they'll go right back and they'll lose 3 out of 4 again. And it's just a lot of that. So
the reason that I went as harsh to call them just flat out bad is again mostly because of the mentality of this team, right? It's bad. That's like I said, they have the mental fortitude of the Oakland Athletics when they have the talent of one of the best teams in professional baseball. And they're really like, they're going to win games just based off of the talent alone, right? That's going to carry them in some games. That's what leads them to score.
Technically,
that's what leads them to score like 13 runs against one of the best pitching staffs in baseball in Baltimore, right? Like, that's going to happen because they are so talented on offense. Is the roster incomplete? Yes. We've talked about that, but they are more than capable of rattling off, you know, a 7-8 game win streak, like you mentioned. Yeah. But having seen them now for 13 weeks, get on a roll and then immediately take 4 or 5 steps back right after, I have no faith in them doing that right now.
Yeah.
So
faith is earned, and the Mariners haven't earned it. And it doesn't follow through for an entire year. Like in April, you say, look, I trust this team. I saw what they did last year. I believe they can turn it around. Cool. That's still totally justifiable. Even in May, like, look, I saw what this team did last year. I understand the talent. They can turn it around. And the Mariners are really good in May. And that's also part of what's frustrating. They were so good in May. It felt like, yep, they've got this turned around. June started out okay, and then it's just collapsed here down the stretch, and now they're going to have a terrible June and get back all the gains they made in the month of May. And now that trust that this team can figure it out and they turn it around, it's shattered. There are people who will not believe it. The Mariners could win 15 in a row starting tomorrow. And people will still say, yeah, but we know they're going to lose, 6 of 7 here down the stretch.
All right. So,
and they've earned that, they haven't earned that level of like, we'll turn it around, at least not based off of what they did last year. That time's gone, right? That honeymoon phase is over. It's turned the page. And now what is this year's team telling me? It's telling you who they are. They're mediocre. They're middle of the road, and they are not a team that is right now mentally equipped. They're physically equipped. They're not mentally equipped to turn this thing around and rattle off the win streak they kind of need now, honestly, to have a shot to, get back in this thing for real.
Yeah, like they need something like a 6-1 road trip heading into the All-Star break, something like that, which that doesn't seem
like 10
very
out of
likely.
12. Yeah.
And it just like what is there here? Like, and again, I try to be optimistic with this team. I've done that for the last 3 months, really tried to stay on the optimistic side of things. But what have the Mariners done this year over these 3 months that suggests that they're capable of going on a run like that? Because again, like, you don't necessarily need a win streak. You could just win like 14 of 18, right? That would be amazing. But the problem is every time this team loses a game, especially in a dramatic fashion, like on Tuesday night, when they lose it in such a devastating way, it takes them multiple days to recover from that.
Yeah. You're just running out of time because now you're in a position where you need that kind of streak to happen in the next month. And winning, 14 out of 18, that takes half of the month, because we're getting to a point, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, where it might not make sense for the Mariners to go add anything or to not value anything that impacts you in 2023, unless it also impacts you in 2024.
Yeah.
And if you don't turn this around, and I mean, like now, there's no reason whatsoever for Jerry and Justin to go out and believe in this team. They have not told ownership. They have not told the baseball ops people. They have not showed them with their actions that they are a team that's worth investing in, and they're running out of time. And that's the scary part. So, you know, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, here, you finish your thought, and then I have a question.
I was just going to say, you know, remember early in the season, we were talking about like Gino getting picked off second just from a lack of focus, and like
right.
Scott should bench him, get him off the field, or somebody, you know, who was it, made they didn't cover the bag or whatever. We're like, get him off the field. Like, you have to sit these guys down when they make a mistake. And, you know, I say that after the fact, and then the next day I come and I go, well, you know, that's not really Scott's thing. Like, I get it. He wants to, you know, criticize privately and praise publicly. And I understand all that and it works. But now I'm wondering if, like, does he just have to do something like that? Like, and it's almost not even fair, but does he just have to pick on the next guy who like doesn't run out a ground ball and just be like, look, sorry, but like, I have to send this message and I have to send it publicly. Is that something we could see change? Because on Monday we saw what can be generously described as a leisurely stroll for a ball thrown down the right field line by two players. Now, ironically, those two players singled and hit a home run the next inning. So, but at what point does Scott say, we can't keep getting picked off. We can't keep, you know, giving half effort defensively. We can't keep striking out, looking, or can't keep chasing pitches a mile out of the strike zone with the bases loaded. Accountability is a real thing. And I have to show this fan base, not the fan base, but I have to show this fan base that we are holding guys accountable, but I have to show this bench that I'm willing to do it publicly, that I'm willing to hold you accountable publicly. And if there's not a move to make in AAA to bring a guy up, or there's not a trade to be made right now, how do you like light a fire under this clubhouse? You pull Teoscar Hernandez out of the game when he jogs to first base on a slow hit ground ball to third. And I'm not saying Teo, you know, has done that, but like, just as an example, like, I think you got to send a message at some point. And I don't think a private message is working, because clearly the Mariners have had lots of team meetings. They've talked about this. You know, only one guy talked to this meeting, blah, players only meeting. Oh, like Scott really got into us. It's not working. It's not working behind the scenes. Do it publicly. You have nothing to lose.
So, you're listening to the Locked On Mariners podcast. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Again, you can catch the Mariners and the Rays starting tomorrow on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. So you mentioned all of those things about what's going on in the clubhouse. You mentioned, you know, Julio and the theory going around that he's the one that Jerry is specifically thinking of when he talks about distracted young players. How much of this really, like, I want to have a real conversation about this, and I still want to talk about the trades and all that stuff, so we won't get too deep into this. Maybe this is something that we can continue on another day, but I don't want to have a conversation from the perspective of, like, you know, what we get in the YouTube comments, which is like, fire Scott, you have to fire Scott, because it's a lot more, there's a lot more context there. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know. We're not there in the clubhouse. We don't know exactly what's going on, who's exactly at fault for all of these things. And like I said last night, you know, you can make the assumption that at least every entity, the players, the front office, the coaching staff is culpable to some degree, right? But Scott in particular, like, do we need to start actually having a conversation about him and if he is the leader for I mean, look, he led them to 2 straight 90-win seasons the past few years, especially in 2021, where they really had no business doing that. But we're seeing this philosophy crumble, particularly the offensive philosophy with all the strikeouts and everything. And there just doesn't really seem to be a lot of accountability with the players right now. So
I know people hate when this analogy gets made, and usually I do too, but I do think it makes some sense here. Was Pete Carroll the problem, or did they just bring in the wrong players for Pete Carroll? Did Pete Carroll all of a sudden stop being a good football coach in the last few years of the Russell Wilson era? Or were there just too many people who had heard the message, where they're just, you know, just bad people who weren't a fit, where was the team so desperate to, try and maximize this window that they didn't consider culture fit on a couple of these acquisitions. Based on what we saw last year, after they kind of cleaned house, it would seem to indicate that it wasn't a Pete problem. It was a locker room problem, which is still partly, Pete's fault, just like the clubhouse problem is still partly Scott Servais's fault. But I don't like, why is Scott Servais to blame for the team's philosophy? He doesn't pick the players, right? He doesn't take the at-bats, right? He's not the one who's striking out with the bases loaded. He's not the one who's popping up on a pitch that's, a foot above the zone, right? So, no, I don't think it's time, because if the problem is, right, that there's a culture problem right now for the Mariners, if that's the problem, that is something that I still trust Scott Servais to fix. Maybe not this year, but I don't see that as a problem. That is his strength. Now we have the same issues going into next year, and we're in the same spot next year. Then, yeah, I think we could legitimately have that conversation. I don't think we're there yet, because again, for me to make that leap that it's time to fire Scott Servais, I have to believe that Scott has gotten worse at managing a clubhouse, something that we think is his greatest strength. He's gotten significantly worse at it. And it's not the player's fault. It's his fault. I'm not making that jump. To me, that it's silly to I hate the whole fire hitting coaches thing. Like, I get it. You're frustrated, but ultimately Tim Laker, who I don't even know who's the hitting coach now.
It's Tony Armrich.
Thank you.
And Jared DeHart.
Right. You fire one of those guys, like, oh, I guess that means, Ty France isn't going to chase a pitch that he couldn't hit with a boat oar. Like, no, that's not how that works. So,
right.
Yeah.
Well, it's like Jerry said, that, you're not going to bring someone in and they're just going to yell, start scoring runs and start hitting, and then people are going to magically start hitting. Right. And that's not Jerry trying to excuse the issues. That's a real thing. That's like, in all fairness, that's an actual real thing that, like,
right. But Sean O'Malley's not going to come up and be the major league hitting coach and be like, hey, don't swing at that pitch. And they're just going to go, oh, okay. Yeah. We just won't. And then they're going to score 6 runs a game.
Yeah.
That's never going to happen. And so,
right.
Specifically Scott, no.
Yeah. I do wonder if maybe the messaging has fallen on deaf ears this year.
Then it's Jerry's job to get with Scott and find out who's not receptive to the messaging anymore and move on. There is, and I want to stress this, there is no single player who is bigger than the Seattle Mariners. There's no player whose ego is more important than the Seattle Mariners winning baseball games.
Well, what if it's Julio?
If it's Julio, then you have to sit down with him. And if he's not willing to change, if he's not willing to hear those things, then you have to be open to the conversation. You have to. Because then what you end up with Russell Wilson running the show and running everybody out of the clubhouse because they don't want to play with him, because he's an egotistical jerk. And I don't think that's Julio. So
no, I don't think that's Julio either.
If Julio is the problem,
real quick.
Right. If Julio is the problem, he's 22, right? Or 21, 22.
He's 22 years old. Yeah.
Right. He's a young guy. He can learn. You can still learn. But if it continues to escalate and there continues to be, issues with this, everything has to be on the table. Julio's success off the field is not more important than the Seattle Mariners winning on the field. Not to you, not to me, not to any fan who's worth anything out there, not to the organization, not to the city, not to the state, not to the region. If I thought Julio Rodriguez was dragging this team down, I would stand up on a pedestal at T-Mobile Park tomorrow and shout, trade Julio. I don't think that's the issue. But if it was, and I had facts to back it up, and it was something that Julio was just refusing to change, get him out of here. I love Julio. I'd rather have a good baseball team than Julio Rodriguez. If I have to pick one or the other, I'm picking the Seattle Mariners being good over Julio Rodriguez, getting a cereal and being in the home run derby. Like, come on, it's a no-brainer. Any real Mariners fan is going to say, I pick the team over the player in terms of personal success. Like, if the player is going to be a distraction, I have to stick with my team. I mean, you could go with Julio, fine, whatever. I don't care. It's your right. You can fan however you want to fan, but ultimately the Mariners' success is worth so much more to me than anything Julio does on the field. Julio could be the worst player on the planet. If the Mariners won 100 games, I wouldn't care. I wouldn't care. Just like Julio could be the best player on the planet, and if the Mariners win 70 games, I'm not sitting here going like, oh, well, at least we have Julio, so that's great. No.
Right. Yeah, I'm tired of taking consolation prizes as a Mariners fan, quite frankly. So.
Yeah. So.
All right. So we're already at 30 minutes, but I want to look at us, not staying on time per usual.
Who would have thought?
There's a lot going on though. There's a lot that we need to. There's a lot that we need to talk about here. So I think there's an argument to be made right now. You know, you're 38 and 41. You're in the middle of the pack in terms of the wild card race. You're 5 back, but you got quite a few teams to leapfrog, or a couple teams that are right on your tail as well. You know, there's the likelihood of you winning the wild card isn't very high, given all those factors. And again, knowing everything that we know up to this point, the 3 months worth of data and information that we have that suggests that the Mariners aren't capable of getting on a run. So I think there's an argument to be made, like I said, that it might not be a justifiable situation here to go and trade resources for someone that only helps you in 2023, right? We talked about the Carlos Santana trade. Now, that didn't cost you a lot last year. That didn't cost you anything that you really care about. But how many teams right now are selling, Colby? 4?
Yeah.
5?
Maybe.
If that. And quite a few of the teams that are bad record-wise, the Padres, the Mets, they're not really in a position where they can justify selling. They need to more so, you know, the Cardinals are another one of these teams where the current position that they're in, where their roster is at, suggests that they need to just ride this thing out and retool for next year with the core that they currently have and not sell off a bunch of pieces. So because of how limited the market is right now, theoretically speaking, at least, what are those prices going to be like? You talked about how like you would spend the, you know, extra 15% or 20% to get a guy right now, but is that actually justifiable considering the spot that you're in right now? Like has your mood changed on that at all since we last talked about this?
Not for the Carlos Santana types who are going to cost you a bag of baseballs. Like, fine, whatever. Those are always worth it. And honestly, no, not even for like the more for example, like Candelario, right? Like probably a pretty expensive rental. He's one of the better bats available. If I could get him now for like 110, 115 cents on the dollar, I would, because if things don't turn around, I can just turn around and flip Candelario for 75 cents of what I paid for it. You know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe I have to give up. I don't know. Maybe I have to give up Las Montes to get Candelario right now. But if things go well and we turn it around, then I have Candelario and I get him for an extra 25, 30 games. If things don't go well in 25, 30 games, I can turn around and trade him for a guy who's half a grade worse than Las Montes. I would take that, I would take that risk. So no. But I think like in terms of like, I think only because it's still June and because it's still pre-All-Star break, I'm willing to take that chance. If we get to the All-Star break and this team is in the same exact position they are right now, no, rentals are out. Like it doesn't make sense because you don't have enough time to turn around and trade that player again.
If you're watching on YouTube, apologies for the random cut. If you're just listening on podcast platforms, then just ignore this. But there was a couple of other things that I wanted to ask Colby and talk about before we hopped off of here, but the lag unfortunately got us. So I'm recording this after the fact real quick to outro the show, and thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Mariners podcast. For Colby Patnode, I'm Trident Gonzalez. Be sure to give us a follow on Twitter at LO_Mariners. You can follow me at Dane Gonzalez, that's DANEGNZLZ, and Colby at CPAT11, that's CPAT11. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok as well over at Locked On Mariners. That's one word, Locked On Mariners. You can also find all that stuff in the description of this episode. Again, you can catch the Mariners and the Tampa Bay Rays starting tomorrow on the Mariners hometown broadcast with SiriusXM via the SXM app. Thank you again for making us your first listen. Have yourself a beautiful baseball day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Peace.